Welcome back to Military Mondays. I'm your host, AJ Brooks. Terry, thanks for joining us in the first segment. We had Terry Balfour here in the studio. Terry is a Portlander. Is that right?
That's right.
I always want to say Portlandian, like Floridian. That's not right, though, is
Nope.
it?
It's Portlander.
Why do I
get it right, man?
It's because of Portlandia. So
It's poisoning everybody's perception on Portland. Everybody forget that show. It's too much of a caricature.
You don't think that people like try to check their email on manual typewriters? You don't think that's fair? You don't think
it happens. We don't need to talk about it, though. It's Portlander.
You know, I set you up to be such an open-minded guy, and you're shutting me down here, Terry, in the second segment.
There's certain subjects we're just going to stay off of.
Well, speaking of progressive friends that have an open mind, care about policy and politics, I got Matt Strabone here in the studio. Matt is a local attorney who's also a strategist that works with candidates, nonprofits. Gives a lot of his time beyond his business to the community. Matt, thanks for being on.
Thanks for having me, AJ.
You know, Matt, I know that you have adapted very well to the West Coast, but you are a born and raised Queens guy, isn't it?
That's right. I'm from Queens, New York.
Well, is there another Queens?
You never know.
Lots of cities call themselves the Queen City. I think Charlotte calls itself the Queen City.
Cincinnati also.
Cincinnati. But there's only one Queens, New York.
Right.
Which means you've got to be a Mets and a Jets fan.
Yeah, you don't really have a choice in Queens. That's true.
You don't. But that alone lets me know that you got heart and character, and you got to have some perseverance if you're a fan of both those teams.
Absolutely. Well, you have to have heart to endure all the heartbreak.
That's just like life. You know, you can't really develop a better picture without the negatives.
Indeed.
Bad dad joke. Well, Matt, I'm glad you're in the studio. I want to talk to you about a couple things to build off what we did in the first segment with Terry about policy. I know you're an attorney here. You've hung out your own shingle. You have your own business. Is that right?
That's right.
Well, you're on the show, and let's go ahead and get a free commercial. It's Strabone Law. Is that right?
Strabone Law, yes. I represent nonprofits, collection of small and family-owned businesses, and certain candidates for office.
I always want to mispronounce your name. What's the most common mispronunciation of your name?
Strabone.
Not Strabone?
Strabone is common too. Strabone, Strombone. It gets mutilated quite a bit.
So let's just set the record straight. It's Strabone Law?
Strabone Law.
And if people if people are charmed by you being on the show and want to seek you out afterwards, where can they find you?
Well, there's a first time for everything, I suppose. The website is strabonelaw.com. I have an office in North Park in San Diego. Certainly, anyone can reach out to me anytime. Happy to talk to anybody.
Fantastic. Well, you're happy to talk to anybody, which means you're on a talk show. We appreciate you coming on. The name of the show is Military Mondays, and a lot of people are surprised that most of our guests don't have a formal military background. But I think in San Diego, we aim to be the voice of the veteran community, and that's not a single voice. Just like the community that we're hosted in is not a single voice. And I think you've got a lot of important perspectives, and you have to talk to all kinds of different candidates and all kinds of different perspectives in your work. Is that fair?
Absolutely. Certainly have a lot of friends who are veteran candidates, but also folks who work in nonprofits who are vets and veteran business owners. In San Diego, there's certainly a high concentration of vets. So my daily life involves a lot of interaction with vets of all kinds.
I think, we had Jim Scott on the show a few weeks ago, and Jim was a Vietnam vet, and Jim's got a great perspective because I think he started ROTC in 1964 when there was this sort of vague sense of patriotism that was a hangover from World War II in Korea. And by the time he graduated in 1966, the public perception of Vietnam and actively serving had shifted differently. So he knows on a personal level that everything isn't particularly clear. You're neither hero nor saint, nor sinner, nor killer necessarily, that it's a little more complex. And I've always appreciated your perspective. You've done a lot of things, and you're here in America's finest city now, but you're not a veteran. But I know you're a member of a couple different organizations that impact policy. Is that right?
Yes.
I think as someone who's served in uniform at the tactical, operational level, and then sort of had a peek over the top of the fence at strategic level policy, there is a perception in a lot of people's minds that there's a disconnect between people that make policy and people that execute it. And I don't always know that that's fair. I do think that there's an increasing divide now that we have almost 40 years of an all-recruited military, and we need broad perspectives. You and I attended an event the other evening about sort of the future of national security, and the focus of that was supposed to be on cybersecurity and pivot to Asia. But the event ended up kind of becoming overcome by energy and almost was a cybersecurity event. I know you were a little disappointed because you care deeply about our security in the Pacific Rim.
That's right.
How does that become a hobby for a guy? Most people have a fantasy football team, or like they grow things on their porch, peppers, tomatoes.
Right. Well, it's not to say I don't have a fantasy football team.
Or a green thumb?
I'm agnostic about being able to raise plants successfully.
I would never bring up something that controversial in the air. I apologize. So tell us how an attorney with his own business gets involved in national security and policy.
Particularly vis-a-vis American foreign policy in the Pacific, I've long believed that the way of the world in the 21st century will largely be defined by the relationship between the United States and China. Certainly the United States remains the top power in the world, but China continues to rise, unquestioned number two, and certainly there are folks who believe that China has designs on challenging us for that top spot. But our economies are deeply interconnected. We work together with China on a host of issues, climate change being one of many different issues. And it is important to realize that the interplay between the U.S. and China drives the entire world, not only from an economic standpoint, but from a political standpoint. The issue we often run into is that there is a serious disconnect at the top level between Beijing and Washington. And what I mean by that is Chinese leadership, by and large, doesn't really understand the way policy gets made in the United States because it's very foreign to them, the way we do things. Similarly, we largely do not grasp the way Beijing makes policy because it is so strange to us. Like during the Cold War, especially early on in the Cold War, there was certain issue with understanding the way the Soviets were making policy. And as we know now that we have all the old Soviet records opened up, the Soviets too had no idea what we were doing when it came to making policy. I would like to see the same thing not happen with our interactions with China. So I've certainly always advocated for increased dialogue, staying in contact with China insofar as we can to kind of minimize the potential for misunderstanding. When you have two large nuclear armed powers that have strategic interests that often go, crosswire to each other, you don't want to have a miscommunication set off a shooting war.
Because the consequences are a whole lot different than two idiots in a bar at the end of the night bumping chests and trying to settle something in the parking lot. This is something that has second and third and fourth tier effects globally.
Yeah, I mean, any conflict between the United States and China, whether it's a shooting war or an economic war, nobody wins. Everybody loses. There will be a lot of suffering in such events. So it's important that we kind of try to continue to build an understanding with the way they do things and kind of hope that they start to understand the way we do things, minimize the potential for misunderstanding and miscommunication.
I think it's a maxim that most military generals are trying to refight and re-win the last war. And even to some degree in politics, you hear people trying to refight and re-win the last election with the types of candidates they field, their approach to data, messaging. You're talking about having an understanding of misreading an opponent or misreading a potential ally. There's a reason that Russia and us developed a rivalry separate from politics. We were sort of the last people standing at the end of the Great War, the Second Great War. And we were permanent members of this National Security Council. We sort of by design worked together to create a safe and stable world. And China was not really a major player or power at that point. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, certainly. When the post-World War II order was built, China was largely on the sidelines. Although, to be fair, they were also given a seat on the National Security Council, a permanent seat, although Taiwan held it first before we recognized China. But that's true, yes. And certainly the last generation or plus, shall we say, that has changed. Soviet Union collapsed and Russia's economy became fairly one note. They certainly like to cause trouble when they can still. That hasn't changed. But from an economic standpoint, it's China far and away has become the other major power in the world and not Russia.
And Japan, despite being economic power, is limited through some of the restrictions that happened in 1947.
Yeah, their constitution is pacifist, but there's also a demographic issue with Japan. The population is dwarfed by that of China, certainly, and also their population is rapidly aging, and they are kind of grappling with how do they support their aging population while not having the same sort of robust following generation to support them. So you've seen kind of China surpass them over the last 20 years economically, just from sheer volume of people and from a demographic standpoint in terms of how what their composition looks like.
In that way, I think a lot of people misread that, and I think Japan has a lot more in common with Europe.
Indeed.
In terms of entitlements, in terms of an aging population, in terms of not replacing its citizenry. All of those great habits that lead to longevity also don't lead to a younger emerging workforce. So if I landed today as an alien and I decided I wanted to get to know Earthlings, and I landed in America and I picked up a newspaper, I would only be reading about the domestic agenda, this new president, and this Russian return that feels like a reboot of maybe 1986, 1987. Right. I mean, we're 4 years removed from a debate where the two candidates for the presidency looked at Russia as sort of rebooting 1980s foreign policy, 1980s concerns. You know, when I listen to you talk about it, and you've been published several times writing about this in national outlets, is that right? Mm-hmm. You're not going to brag on yourself, so I'll do it for you. U.S. News and World Report a couple times, right? Right. You clearly care about this and have articulated positions that can be read in a broad sense. If I'm this alien that lands today and I'm trying to learn about this country, I don't see China anywhere right now. It seems that there was a little concern in the beginning during the president-elect's phone call to Taiwan, but your advocacy, your concern is that we've got this long-standing relationship and there's security around it that's compromised, and people are sort of not allowing it to have the same kind of emphasis it's had over the last 40 years.
Right. Well, I would say the alien picked a particularly inopportune time to land because we have these new first-order concerns that have popped up very recently that we don't have to get into.
Traffic was horrible getting here. Intergalactic travel was very difficult. You think it's bad in California.
Right.
So the alien lands at the wrong time.
Right.
And then the second thing is, where's China in the paper?
Yeah. It's kind of easy to forget about it. We have a long history, as we've been talking about, of interaction with Russia. So in the American psyche, Russia continues to hold a certain place. So it's very easy for, I think, the American people to pick back up on any thread that involves rivalry between the U.S. and Russia. China is sort of different. You don't have that same societal memory about rivalry. But, to be honest, it remains, the U.S. China relationship remains one of our biggest challenges of our foreign policy and for our national security going forward, and it will continue to be so. And I lament that there is not enough oxygen, not enough newspaper space given to what goes on, because we did have a very interesting interaction at the end of 2016, the very beginning of 2017, where the incoming administration had said some things about possibly recognizing Taiwan, and that while it made some headlines, but that would have been an extraordinary break from established American policy for good reason. It seemed like the new administration was wanting to treat China sort of like a rival business, when you have to make a deal with a rival business, you say, okay, everything's on the table, we're going to renegotiate everything. And you
negotiate from a position of power, or you're seeking leverage,
right?
All those things that maybe don't apply in diplomacy,
right? I mean that might all work in the business world, but the average business doesn't have nuclear weapons, doesn't have tanks, doesn't have aircraft carriers, doesn't have forever strategic interests that you're touching upon. And the administration learned, in January of this year, that China was not about to back down on Taiwan specifically, and the administration did have to kind of give up on that idea of putting Taiwan on the table, because that was China's red line. And that's what I mean when I talk about misunderstanding. If we don't understand that Taiwan is China's bright red line, the one thing that we can count on they will actually go to war over, and we start talking about it flippantly, that is it going to anger Beijing? Certainly, but it is also going to create a misunderstanding in Beijing that we also view Taiwan as a red line. And whether we do or we don't is an open question. I mean, hopefully a question we don't have to answer in our lifetimes. But for an administration to come in and say, okay, Taiwan's on the table without a complete understanding that is like the one thing China won't negotiate on is very dangerous, which is why I think we do have to kind of focus a little more on understanding our relationship with China and what we can and cannot do, and what makes sense for stability in the region. Because, the Pacific specifically, economically, is the fastest growing region in the world. It will continue to be so for the next couple of decades at least. There is a lot of money to be made by American businesses in the Pacific. There are a lot of opportunities to be had. Without stability in the Pacific, and that stability is predicated on the U.S. and China coming to at least an understanding of one another, the money can't be made, the jobs can't be had, the investment can't be made. opportunities will be lost. Opportunities that benefit a lot of folks, a lot of average people that may not realize it. And certainly stability, just from a security standpoint, we are bordered by the Pacific Ocean in the west. We would like a stable Pacific Ocean. We would like a entire region of stability. And if China starts thinking that we can't understand them, we can't work with them, China's going to start pressing us where they think we're weak, and that leads to instability, insecurity, and the potential for danger. And that's not an outcome I think anybody wants.
Matt, we have all kinds of guests on this show. We have had professional athletes, rabbis, interfaith leaders, nonprofit folks, and a lot of it's focused on the intersection of military and civilians here in the San Diego community. Sometimes we talk about big blue arrow policy stuff, but I think for veterans, they are also aware that over the last 40 years, there have been points of friction with China where it could have escalated, but cooler heads prevailed. And we can talk a little bit more about that in the second half. Thanks for a lot of your comments. We're going to have to take a commercial here on Military Mondays on Homefront Media.
AM 1170. The Answer.
I'm Sean Vandiver. I'm a San Diegan and a veteran of the U.S. Navy. I have veteran friends from all across the political spectrum, but there's one thing the best of us have in common. We want to keep the world safe so that we can make it a better place. That's why I joined the Truman National Security Project. We are a nationwide community forged in the aftermath of 9/11, fighting for America's promise on the battlefield, along the campaign trail, and in the halls of government. So check Truman Project out online on Twitter at Truman Project, on Facebook at Truman National Security Project, and online at trumanproject.org.
I tried to plan an exit strategy, but it didn't really work out as planned because you can't really plan for life. With workshops for warriors, my future is a lot brighter than it was. It was pretty tough before I came out here, but now I have options and direction.
Workshops for Warriors is a school in San Diego that trains and certifies veterans into advanced manufacturing careers, all at no cost to the veteran. They leave with portable and stackable nationally recognized credentials. Visit WFWUSA.org to learn more.
San Diego's very own late-night comedy variety show, Tonight in San Diego, wants you to be part of their live studio audience. Each show is jam-packed with comedy acts, musical performances, and special guest interviews. And get this, the tickets are just $7. Join us every Monday night at 7:30 p.m. at the Jeffrey Theater in downtown San Diego near Spreckles. Tickets and guest info can be found at our website, tonightinsandiego.com.
Hi, this is Flossie Hall, owner of Healthy Mama. I started Healthy Mama because I'm a mother of 4 and a military spouse and had a hard time finding healthy options for my family. I started this company to help keep my family on track with healthy meals without having the complicated tasks of cooking all day, every day. We offer the most affordable meal prepping service in San Diego. Healthy meals delivered to your door every Sunday. All you do is heat and eat. Order Healthy Mama meal prepping today at www.healthy-mama.com.
AM 1170. The Answer.
Welcome back to Military Mondays here on Homefront Media. In the studio, I've got good friend Terry Balfour and another friend of mine, Matt Strabone. We started talking about, this is your President's Day edition, we started talking about past relationships, how policy impacts our life here on the home front. And we've had all kinds of folks here on the show to discuss different things. But I've got two friends with broader perspectives than you might hear elsewhere. Terry, thanks for some of your comments and thoughts in the first segment. And Matt, thank you for joining us in the second segment. We're going to wrap up here in the third segment talking a little bit more about the topic of national security as it relates to policy. And I think most of us here worry about the price of gas, what the interest rate is, can I make the mortgage? And we care about what's going on in the world, but most of us think that politics is local. Terry and I talked before the show, if we mess up this American experiment, there's no America left to go to. And I think that how we approach our place in the world as a neighbor is critical, just like any other relationship, as a rivalry, as an opportunity for an ally. And Matt Strabone in the second segment talked a lot about our relationship in the Pacific. He and I both attended an event recently where we were talking about 21st century threats. And we discussed this idea that in politics and sometimes in the military, we try to fight the last war, or we try to re-win the last election instead of focusing on what comes next. And most of us really should have a big windshield and a small rearview mirror. But if it didn't go well, a lot of times, especially if you've been rear-ended before, you spend a lot of time glancing up in that rearview mirror, sort of trying to relive and make sure something's not sneaking up on you. We talked a little bit about this idea that there's a lot of focus on changes to the domestic agenda and maybe an over concern with Russia because we're trying to refight some of those old fights because we know where we had missteps in the past. And Matt expressed some concerns about not making that same mistake with our relationship with China. We have got a great understanding in some ways of Chinese culture and how policy is made in China. And there's also some things where we continue to misjudge and misunderstand. I think there's been a few spots, Matt, that where tempers have flared over subs and P3s and incursions into each other's waters and sovereignty, and cooler heads have prevailed, and we've been able to have 40 years of peace and economic stability since the Nixon administration with China. Is that right?
Indeed.
And you'd like to see that continue?
I would, yes. I'm pro stability. I also think, the point that often gets missed is that the current arrangement, by and large, is beneficial to the United States. I mean, all of the conflict of late is far in the Western Pacific, much closer to China than it is to us. Specifically the South China Sea and the disputed islands there. Insofar as American national security is concerned, we want these issues, these relatively small issues, to be far away from us. We don't want these issues to be off the coast of California, certainly. And I think it's important that we manage these issues that are far from our shores effectively so that they stay there. We have to keep them kind of contained there. And I think there are diplomatic ways to resolve those crises anyway, and we should pursue those. But insofar as our national security is concerned, we don't want these issues popping up in the Caribbean, let's say. That would obviously not be good for anybody.
You're a small business owner, which means you've got to spend a ton of your time finding talent, finding clients, building relationships, but yet you use some of your personal time to take this on because it matters to you. You got listeners that are stuck in traffic, listening to the show between 6 and 7 p.m., thinking, that's all well and good for him, but how do I make a difference? There are definitely veterans in this community who've had experiences on subs, on carriers, and at that time in their life, they weren't allowed to talk about sort of these near misses in the Pacific. You talk to a lot of old vets and you realize even in a Cold War, there are some very warm moments that have the opportunity to get hot fast. I know people write letters to the editor, they write their congressman. What would you recommend for someone who's had a life of service, who's continued to be a member of this community, to hold their publicly elected officials accountable and advocate for better policy?
Sure. And the letter to the editors are an excellent starting point. But I would say if you have, a useful perspective on these issues that are fairly discreet, especially for the majority of us, and you want to influence the debate on those issues, please feel encouraged to, don't just write a letter to the editor, write an entire op-ed, put together, spend a little bit of time and write an op-ed that can get published in your local newspaper or in some other outlet. Because if folks who don't have that experience and that perspective stay silent on the issues like this, that vacuum gets filled by folks who don't have that experience and don't have that perspective and don't have that knowledge. And then we have a debate that is not terribly well informed. So I consider it a civic duty for anybody who has, important insights to share on important issues like this. Share what they have, share what they know, so that the people can understand the issues better. That's critically important for a functioning democracy. Those who have knowledge to share that knowledge. So that's what I would encourage your listeners to do. Even if writing is not something you're comfortable with, talk to friends of yours who might have a little more experience, or whoever you can reach out to. Go on programs like this one. Have conversations with friends of yours. Share that experience. We have to educate each other. That's such a critical component of a successful society like ours.
People that want to transmit frequently don't have the best experience, and sometimes the people that I've got to drag onto this show have the most to say. And Terry, thank you again for joining us in the first segment. And Matt, to echo what you just said, I think about some of the writers that I've really enjoyed over the years, and they always say you've got to read probably 100 times as much as you write. Right. You've got to make sure that you're considering and listening and turning something over before you transmit. And I think when it comes to matters of policy and national security, people feel like it's beyond them. It's a Washington thing. But you're a member of a couple organizations locally where you stop and consider opinions and listen to broader perspectives. And I think that, that can be as simple as a book club.
Right. Definitely. And, let's not forget the phrase Beltway is a derogatory phrase for a number of reasons. But indeed, that does seem like that's where all the policy gets made. And that you miss out on so many perspectives. Like here, out west, I mean, in the Midwest, in the Northeast, in the South, everywhere, there are different perspectives on issues like this, like China. You know, it's important to remember that you may have a different take on important issues than the folks who spend their lives in DC. And that's not to say those folks aren't smart and aren't doing the best they can. But again, in a successful functioning democracy, it is important for folks of all different perspectives. That includes perspectives of geography, to have their say, share what they know. You know, we have a different perspective in California. We are on the Pacific coast. It's inevitable that we may look at Pacific issues differently than folks in DC on the Atlantic seaboard might see them. So, you know, don't feel like this is beyond you. We're all citizens. Good citizenship requires engagement. And engagement means speaking about those issues that you feel passionately about, that you have some knowledge about. Share that with your fellow citizens in whatever way you can.
You know, I think there's a reason Warren Buffett has been wildly successful from Omaha as opposed to Manhattan, is that he has a front row seat to perspectives that probably represent a greater sense of what consumer trends are, what people are thinking and deciding. You know, you and I were at an event the other evening, and there was such a concern about cyber and the grid, and I couldn't help but think, as I listened to some of this Chicken Little speech getting more and more fanatical, that I've been in environments where the grid went down, hurricanes. I've been in developing countries, and people step up. Something Terry said about certain communities is that when they're better when they're in difficult times. You know, Minnesota is a much, much more hospitable place in the winter than it is in the summer, because everybody's in trouble. You're a few hours away from death if you get stuck in a car. So you don't pass a car, you stop and haul a car. People that really sort of reach out to each other. And I think sometimes you got to stop and say, I think I'm seeing that maybe the emperor has no clothes. I think I'm seeing that maybe this isn't best. You know, maybe I haven't served since Vietnam, but when I was on a ship, we saw this in the Pacific, and I certainly don't want that to happen again. So I think sometimes voices that need to be heard aren't heard. And that's another reason I have both you guys on here today, because I think you're both willing to listen. I think you both care about transmitting and sharing and making sure that stuff is heard. Terry, you're going to be here in the San Diego area through the weekend. Is that right?
That's right.
So, Matt, give him a piece of advice about something he's got to see. The guy was looking for some sun, and he came here on like one of the only cloudy weekends we've had. If you were only in San Diego for the weekend, what would you absolutely do?
I would say that our crown jewel is Balboa Park. You know, I mean, it's easy to talk about the beaches, and we have beautiful beaches, of course. But Balboa Park is a unique experience that's not to be missed. Most things are free. There are some museums that may charge, but we have just a wonderful civic institution in Balboa Park. You can also find the zoo right there in Balboa Park, which is, of course, another crown jewel. I would say anyone who has a short amount of time here, I would suggest that they spend at least some time in the park. It really is extraordinary.
So that was a pop question, pop test, pop quiz question, and that's exactly what I had said before. I was hoping that you'd say the same thing.
So that's 2 votes for Balboa Park.
That's right, and 0 for the beach. You're from Florida. You don't need to do that here.
Exactly. Seen enough of that.
The water's too cold anyway. Terry, thanks for joining us in the studio.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming to America's finest city. I hope you enjoy your time here, and I hope the weather's wrong. I love this city, but I'm not sure that San Diego gets the best meteorologists. And
let's hope so.
Let's and I say that with all apologies to my friends who are in the weather business here, but sometimes we like it when you're wrong. We don't like it when politicians are wrong. We don't like it when all kinds of other folks are wrong, but when the weather says cloudy, it ends up being sunny. I think we're fine with that. Matt, thanks for joining us in the studio too. Is there anything you want to wrap up with? You're with Strabone Law. People, I'm sure, enjoyed hearing you speak today about one of your hobbies. But if they want to seek out your services as an attorney, can you tell us again how to find you?
Certainly, strabonelaw.com. So that's STRABONELAW.com. If you are a nonprofit, or you are a small business, or you're considering a run for office and you'd like to avoid corruption, certainly reach out. Always happy to help folks who are looking for help. Yeah.
Gentlemen, I enjoyed having both your perspectives on the show. Terry Balfour, thanks for coming to town. Hope you have fun while you're here in San Diego. And Matt, thanks for making time for us midday to talk about some of the things you're interested and passionate about.
Thank you.
Thank you.
AM 1170, The Answer.
Hi, I'm Nathan Fletcher, founder and chairman of the Three Wise Men Veterans Foundation. The Three Wise Men Veterans Foundation, we honor those who served by standing with them as they not only survive, but they thrive in the peace that follows combat. The unfortunate reality is today in America, between 22 and 50 veterans take their own life each day. And they do this despite an abundance of love and supportive programs, in many part because they can't overcome the stigma of the unseen wounds of war. We reach out directly to veterans with the message of hope and strength. We connect them to services that are needed. We support legislation to tackle the stigma of the unseen wounds of war. And mostly, we make sure they know that those that fought for our country have got to have the courage to fight for their future, to fight for their families, to fight to make a difference, and to honor their brothers and sisters who might not have survived combat by living a life of purpose and progress. I would encourage you to visit www.3wm.org. Again, that's 3wm.org to learn more. Thank you.
My name is Mark West, and I am the chair of Surfrider San Diego. As a San Diegan, and as a person who's lived here in San Diego, we have one of the greatest coastal communities in all the world. We have 72 miles of beaches that stretch all the way from Tijuana to San Clemente. It's really our greatest natural resource. It's part of our culture, it's part of our history, and we need to preserve and protect it. And that doesn't mean I want to put a giant rope around it so it's pristine. No, I want people to go out and enjoy it and be a part of it, because that's what really makes San Diego a special place that we call home. If you feel as strongly as I do about protecting our ocean waves and beaches, get on our website. It's www.surfrider, that's surfridersd.org. Plenty of information about all our committees, events, ways to donate, everything you can find out just on our website. So www.surfridersd.org, and you can find out all you want about how to get involved and be a part of our family at Surfrider San Diego.
Hi, I'm Bob Muth, and I'm the managing attorney of the Veterans Legal Clinic at the University of San Diego School of Law. The Veterans Legal Clinic at USD provides free legal services to veterans, active duty, reservists, and their families. If you've had issues when trying to use your post 9/11 GI Bill benefits at a for-profit school, or if you feel the VA is wrongly denying you medical or disability benefits, or if you need help correcting the characterization of your discharge, please give us a call to see if we can help. You can reach us at 619-260-7470.
AM 1170, The Answer.
Well, you've gone and done it. You've wasted another hour of your life here at Military Mondays on Homefront Media, but we appreciate it because you were probably stuck in traffic and you stuck with us anyway. Today, you had a reason to stay with us. We had two great guests in the studio, Terry Balfour and Matt Strabone. Before we wrap up and go to the next show, I just wanted to thank both of them for coming on. Matt, I got a pair of tickets for tonight in San Diego for you. It's one of my favorite opportunities beyond Balboa Park for entertainment here in San Diego. Terry's going to be gone before he'd have a chance to do it, but it's live entertainment. Jesse Egan, who's a friend of the show, and Folly Lewis have been putting this on for 4 seasons, and they have great guests, great live music. It's a fantastic opportunity to see San Diego up close and personal. And we got a stainless mug for you because I think you still drink coffee in the morning. Sometimes it's hard to get out of bed from our folks, from our friends Brad and Celeste. And I know that there's another topic beyond national security, beyond our relationship in the Pacific, and beyond nonprofits and politics that sort of touches everybody. When we're talking about holding politicians accountable, and we're talking about demanding more from your media, it's where does the money that pays for all of this come from? Is that fair?
Yeah. Certainly those that know me know that fighting corruption is my biggest single issue that I care about, specifically regarding what we call dark money. And dark money is this, it's obviously not a positive term, but still it's more positive than what it really is, and that's corruption. There are untold, unaccountable millions of dollars entering into our political system, entering into our government. We're not able to find out where the money comes from, where it goes, how it's spent. We do know it goes to support politicians who run for office, who are in office. And I want to be clear, this is not a partisan issue. This is not a Republican issue, a Democratic issue, anything like that. What I am against is corruption, specifically unchecked money entering our system that cannot be accounted for. No one is answerable for it. And this money could come from anywhere. It could come from large corporations, and it largely does. It could also come from foreign governments.
So if I'm still voting in my home state and I'm looking at my opportunities to vote for a senator or my congressman, and I look at their donor list, I see certain large corporations that may produce military hardware, and I know that they're going to vote for purchasing new stuff because it's good for that company, as opposed to making policy that's good for those that serve. Is that what you're talking about, or is it something bigger than that?
Something bigger, because contributions directly to candidates get disclosed. And we can look at the disclosures and figure out where that money comes from, and that's fine. But when you see TV ads about certain candidates, when you get mail about certain candidates, when you hear radio ads and anything about candidates from and it says paid for by some organization you've never heard of, that is probably a dark money organization, and there's no way to track where that money comes from, who gave that organization money, who's behind that organization. It could be anyone. It could be the Chinese government, it could be the Russian government, it could be ISIS, it could be a large corporation, it could be your next door neighbor. You have no way of finding out, and that is what bothers me. So I would encourage your listeners, if that bothers them too, if the idea of this rampant corruption in our government bothers them, call your member of Congress, call your senator, call your local elected official and say, I would like dark money out of my politics.
So we're in our last 30 seconds. Matt, have you written about this topic also?
I have at length written about this topic in a few different outlets, The Hill being one, a couple of others. I will continue to do so until this is fixed.
Well, thanks for being an advocate for good government, transparent government, and being a patriot. Terry, thanks for being on the show. Matt, thanks both for joining us here on Military Mondays as part of Homefront Media.
Thank you.